Asian leaders working to build economic ties with their global partners as the region grapples with steep U.S. tariffs.
President Trump arrived in Malaysia overnight for a summit with Asian leaders. America's tense trade relationship with China topping the agenda.
I like him a lot. He likes me a lot, I believe, and respects me, and I think he respects our country a lot. And I think we're going to have a successful transaction for both countries.
What if I told you the world's biggest rivals just did something no one thought possible? After years of tariffs, threats, and near economic warfare, Donald Trump and Xi Jinping have struck a surprise deal, and it could change everything. On the surface, it looks like peace, but behind closed doors, this agreement is about much more than trade. It's about control over technology, over rare earth minerals, and over the future itself. Because this time, it's not just money at stake. It's power, and the choices made in the next few weeks could decide who leads the global economy for the next generation. But here's the twist. Both leaders think they've outsmarted the other, so who really won, and what secret leverage lies behind this so-called breakthrough? Let's break down the deal that could reshape the world. The deal that changed the game. Something big just happened, and almost no one saw it coming. After years of tension, surprise tariffs, and headline-grabbing threats, the US and China finally agreed to step back from the edge. Over the weekend at the ASEAN summit in Kuala Lumpur, Trump's team and Xi Jinping's top negotiators reached what they're calling a preliminary framework for a trade deal. It's not a final peace treaty, but it's the first real sign of calm in a storm that's been building for years. According to US officials, this early agreement could pause Trump's 100% tariff plan on Chinese imports, a move even he admitted was unsustainable. In return, China is expected to delay its new export restrictions on rare earth minerals, the raw materials that power everything from fighter jets to smartphones. That's a massive deal because China controls around 70% of the global supply of these minerals. Without them, the US military and tech industries would be in serious trouble. But here's where it gets interesting. Washington says it was Trump's tariff threats that brought Beijing back to the table. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent even said, "The president gave me leverage." Maybe he's right, or maybe China knew that holding rare earths hostage could hit the US harder than any tariff ever could. Either way, the message is clear. Both sides needed this deal. The global economy has been under pressure. Investors have been nervous, and no one, not even Trump, wants another trade war right now. And while the headlines talk about cooperation and progress, insiders know this is just the opening round. The real question is, who's getting the better end of the deal? Because as it turns out, this isn't just about trade, it's about control. Control over minerals, technology, and the future of global power. And what comes next might change the balance between the US and China forever. Minerals, technology, and hidden leverage. If you think this deal is just about lowering tariffs, think again. And what comes next could decide who leads the next generation of global technology. The tech conflict and global chessboard. When most people hear about a trade war, they think about cars, soybeans, or cheap products on store shelves. But that's not what's really at stake here. This fight between the US and China isn't just about money. It's about who controls the technology of the future. Let's start with something that seems small, but isn't. Agriculture. For months, American farmers have been struggling because China cut back on buying US soybeans. That hit the heart of Trump's voter base hard. So during these latest talks, the US pushed Beijing to restart major soybean purchases, promising relief for farmers who've been running on thin margins since the first round of tariffs years ago. But even that's part of a bigger strategy, because while farmers were hurting, tech companies were panicking. Think about it. American firms depend on China for manufacturing chips, phones, and even electric car parts. At the same time, Chinese companies like Huawei and TikTok depend on US technology and app markets to stay relevant. It's a weird kind of mutual dependence, where both sides can hurt each other badly, and both know it. That's why the deal included something that almost slipped under the radar, a restructuring of TikTok. Under the new plan, TikTok would become a company majority owned by American investors, giving the US more control over its data and security. It's basically Trump's win on paper, but to China, it's a small price to pay to keep access to the US market. And then there's the global chessboard part. While Washington and Beijing make headlines, other other countries are quietly picking sides. Nations like Australia, Japan, and India are moving closer to the US, forming new supply chain partnerships to cut down dependence on China. Meanwhile, Beijing is locking in deals across Africa and Southeast Asia, securing long-term access to raw materials and trade routes. So while this breakthrough deal looks peaceful, what's really happening is a global power shuffle, one where every country is figuring out how to survive between two giants. Because when technology, minerals, and trade mix together, it's not just business anymore, it's a new kind of Cold War, and every nation is now part of the board. Unresolved fault lines and what comes next. For all the excitement about this historic breakthrough, the truth is, the deal isn't finished, not even close. What we're seeing right now is more like a temporary ceasefire than a full peace treaty, and deep down, both sides know it. The framework Trump and Xi agreed on still has huge unanswered questions, from cybersecurity and intellectual property theft to the future of high-tech exports. These aren't small details, they're the exact issues that caused the trade war in the first place. Without solving them, the risk of another flare-up is always there. Even US officials have quietly admitted that the fine print is still vague. China's state media has also been careful not to call this deal a victory or even a truce. Just progress. That's diplomat talk for let's wait and see what happens next. And what happens next could be massive, because in just a few days, Trump and Xi are scheduled to meet face-to-face in South Korea, their first meeting since 2019. Every analyst is calling it a make-or-break moment. If both sides follow through, the world could see a genuine cooling of tensions, maybe even new cooperation in tech and energy. But if it falls apart, the global markets, supply chains, and even the US election could feel the shock. Meanwhile, other countries are watching very closely. Nations in Asia, especially places like Malaysia, Vietnam, and South Korea, know that their economies depend on stability between these two superpowers. If the US and China fight, everyone in the region feels the pain. That's why ASEAN leaders have been pushing hard to keep talks alive. And here's something that doesn't get said enough. Both sides need this deal. China's economy is slowing, and Trump wants a big diplomatic win ahead of an election year. Each leader is playing a careful game, trying to look strong while quietly making compromises behind the scenes. So the big question isn't whether this deal will be signed, it's whether it will last. Because history shows every time Washington and Beijing call a truce, it never stays quiet for long, and what happens in the next few weeks could decide if this is the start of a new era, or just another pause before the next big clash. Conclusion. So what does this all really mean? For now, it's clear that both the US and China have stepped back from the edge, but not out of the fight. This deal might cool tensions for a while, yet beneath the surface, the rivalry for global power, resources, and technology is still burning. Trump gets to claim a diplomatic win, Xi gets time to stabilize China's economy, and the rest of the world gets a brief sigh of relief. But no one's letting their guard down, because this isn't just about trade, it's about who shapes the next century. The real story isn't the signatures or the handshakes, it's what happens when two superpowers realize they can't destroy each other, but can't fully trust each other either. And that's a story far from over.